Can you just shed some light as to how much of a complicating factor that is for an area of Texas that has already suffered so much tragedy in such a short amount of time?
Kailey, the onset of additional weather just makes it so much more difficult for everybody, for the first responders, but also for the families who have already been displaced. You know, they want to go out there and help their neighbors and try to find some of their belongings or help to try to find the missing loved ones. But if this weather continues to come in, what you may see is people, end up in a compromising situation, and it puts their own safety at risk again. And I think, as you heard from the press conference earlier today, really encouraging people to stay out of harm's way. But they've been displaced from their homes too. And so they have to make sure that they are in a safe place, that they're in a spot that's going to keep them and their families safe from this next round of weather while they continue the critical work of searching for those that are still missing.
Well, and indeed, I'm glad you mentioned that as these search and rescue efforts continue, Deanne. We'd like to hear from you on the challenges facing FEMA. Obviously, this is a large-scale disaster that we're talking about here, and we know that the administration has different ideas about the way FEMA should be conducting its business. Just 4 days into this term, President Trump went to North Carolina. You probably remember, to tour damage from Hurricane Helene, which you know a lot about, and had this to say about FEMA. Listen.
I'll also be signing an executive order to begin the process of fundamentally reforming and overhauling FEMA, or maybe getting rid of FEMA. I think, frankly, FEMA is not good. I think when you have a problem like this, I think you want to go and, whether it's a Democrat or Republican governor, you want to use your state to fix it and not waste time.
FEMA's not good, he said. This should be the job of the states. Deanne, what lesson are we learning right now that the president might need to hear?
I think the most important thing is that it has always been the responsibility of states and locals to manage disasters. They are the first responders. They are the ones that went in to help those people that were impacted. The state sent in additional resources. They will be there long after the media leaves, and FEMA will stay to help them with the recovery. I think that there is an opportunity, absolutely, to improve the way we reimburse, or FEMA reimburses, the damages or the rebuilding that happens afterwards. That's something that should definitely be worked on. But when you look at a situation like Texas, and you look at the type of complicated search and rescue activities that have happened, or the amount of debris that's going to need to be removed, what FEMA does and what FEMA can do, and I think what often gets lost, is they coordinate the whole federal government. So if you needed to bring in the Army Corps of Engineers to help with debris removal, they coordinate that and they fund that through the Disaster Relief Fund. Or if you need to bring in hospital assessment teams to do the same thing. I think the first question should be, what problem are we trying to fix? There are some, without a doubt, but to have blanket statements without fully understanding what it is we're trying to improve just doesn't take into account the second and third order impacts that might come from that.
Well, and when we consider the capabilities of states who, understood, Deanne, are the first responders in any disaster scenario, Texas obviously is a larger one. Not all states enjoy the same resources. But is any state alone capable of responding to a disaster at this scale without FEMA currently? How do you prepare them for something like that if we are to see FEMA eventually dismantled, if that's still the president's aim?
I think the one thing that, Texas is capable of is they have resources, they have capacity. They are one of the most capable states that are out there. But you look at a situation that they're experiencing now, and they also need some assistance, right? And we shouldn't be asking state and local jurisdictions to replicate everything that the federal government can bring to assist them, because they just can't do it at the scale that the federal government can, right? The federal government can create those opportunities to be able to use across all of the states if they have need. But to have every state replicate that capability, I just don't think it's a smart use of taxpayer dollars at the state level or the local level.
What's the impact of the rhetoric? FEMA is not good, as the president said, and we all recall what took place in North Carolina. Deanne, I know you surely do, following Hurricane Helene, in which a lot of conspiracies needed to be debunked by FEMA and by representatives, including the fact that nobody can control the weather, the fact that FEMA is not there to confiscate your goods. We could see all of this replay in Texas. What are these agents at FEMA in for?
You know, that kind of misinformation does a number of different things, right? It creates an environment for FEMA responders to feel less valued, right? And they are some of the most dedicated public servants that I have ever worked with, who leave their homes and their families to go help those that have been impacted. And so when you start to impact their own morale, it can certainly impact how they're going to want to be able to continue to support. And we've already seen people take advantage of some of the buyout options that have been offered. But it also creates this environment with the local communities and their own reputation. I mean, I even remember in North Carolina, one community saying, this isn't who we are as a community. You know, we want FEMA here. We need you here. And so, again, it's important to get the right information out there to help people understand what's factual and what's not factual, because I fear that then people will not apply for assistance when it is available that they would be eligible for. We want to help them on that road to recovery.
Well, and of course, FEMA's role is really being active in that recovery. FEMA steps in when disaster has already occurred, Deanne. It becomes a question as well as to what can be done to better prepare any community from Texas to anywhere else in the country for disasters. We're seeing more and more severe weather events in terms of adaptation, in terms of mitigation. What do we need to be doing better in that arena?
I think it's important to be able to continue to not just look at historical events that are impacting communities, but to be able to use research and science to understand what the future impacts are going to be so they can make smart investments in mitigation to reduce the impact of these events. We have seen during my 4 years and already with this event that these types of weather events are breaking records, things that people didn't even expect or think was in the realm of possibility. How high these rivers are getting, or the number of tornadoes that are coming through a community, or how fast a hurricane is intensifying in the Gulf or the Atlantic. You know, these are continuing to break records month after month and year after year. So communities have to be able to think forward. They have to invest today to help mitigate against those and reduce that impact. And that's what is going to be the most critical as we go forward.
Deanne, you've been hearing, I'm sure, some of the reporting around what led to this, whether budget cuts had anything to do with it. Ted Cruz was asked about this at a briefing earlier, the senator from Texas, a briefing earlier today on the damage, and pushed back hard on the assertions that DOGE cuts impacted the Texas flood impact. Listen to what he said.
There have been some eager to point at the National Weather Service and say cuts there led to a lack of warning. I think that's contradicted by the facts. The National Weather Service here, New Braunfels is where they were headquartered. They had additional manpower. In fact, they had 3 additional people working that night, anticipating that it was going to be a very dangerous weather situation. I also think it's worth noting that the National Weather Service Union, which has been very critical of the DOGE cuts, has publicly said that they don't believe that the reduction in staffing had any impact whatsoever on their ability to warn of this event.
Deanne, we only have 30 seconds. You haven't seen any evidence that would lead you to believe this, would you?
No, I think the most important thing, as the senator mentioned, is to focus on continuing these search and rescue efforts. There is going to be plenty of time to look into what happened.